The Whisper of the Forgotten. The rain fell in sheets, turning the streets of New York City into a shimmering labyrinth of reflections. Ellie Grayson adjusted her trench coat, pulling it tighter around her as she hurried down the sidewalk. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement, a rhythmic counterpoint to the drumming of the rain. She had just left the offices of the Chronicle, where she had been handed the most peculiar assignment of her career. It had started with a letter, an anonymous tip, scrawled in shaky handwriting, that had arrived at the newspaper's mailbox. The letter claimed that there had been an event, a catastrophic one, that had been erased from history. No one remembered it, but its effects were everywhere. The writer insisted that Ellie was the only one who could uncover the truth. At first, she had dismissed it as the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist. But then she noticed something strange. The letter mentioned a date, October 12, 1987, and when she looked it up, she found nothing. No major news stories, no historical records, not even a mention in the archives. It was as if the day had been wiped clean from existence. Ellie's curiosity got the better of her. She began digging, starting with the archives of the Chronicle. She spent hours poring over microfiche, scanning through newspapers from the late 1980s. But there was nothing. No mention of October 12, 1987. It was as if the day had never happened. Then she noticed something else. In the weeks following that date, there were subtle changes in the world. A sudden shift in global politics, a spike in technological advancements, a mysterious increase in funding for scientific research. It was as if the world had been reset, but no one seemed to notice. Ellie's investigation led her to Dr. Arthur Langston, a retired physicist who had worked for the government during the 1980s. Langston was reluctant to talk at first, but Ellie's persistence paid off. Over a cup of coffee in his cluttered apartment, Langston revealed a startling truth. There was an event, he said, his voice trembling, a catastrophic experiment that went wrong. It was supposed to be a breakthrough in quantum physics, but something went horribly wrong. The experiment created a rift in space-time, and for a brief moment, the world as we knew it ceased to exist. Ellie's heart raced. What happened? Langston shook his head. I don't know. I was there, but I can't remember. None of us can. The government erased it from history. They used some kind of technology to wipe our memories, to make sure no one would ever know what happened. Ellie's mind was reeling. If what Langston said was true, then the event had been erased from history, but its effects were still being felt. She needed to find out more, but Langston was the only lead she had. And then, as if on cue, Langston's phone rang. He answered it, his face turning pale. I have to go, he said abruptly, hanging up. You should leave too. They're watching. Before Ellie could ask who they were, Langston ushered her out of his apartment and closed the door behind her. She stood in the hallway, her mind racing. Who was watching? And what were they trying to hide? As she left the building, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but she could feel eyes on her. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to find out more, but she was running out of time. The rain continued to fall, washing away the traces of her footsteps as she disappeared into the night. Shadows in the archives. Ellie's apartment was a mess. Papers were strewn across every surface. Books lay open on the floor, and her laptop hummed softly on the coffee table. She had been up all night, piecing together fragments of information, trying to make sense of the puzzle that was October 12, 1987. The more she dug, the more she realized how deep the rabbit hole went. Langston's words haunted her. They erased it from history, but who were they? And how could an entire event be wiped from existence? She needed more evidence, something concrete that she could use to build a story. But every lead she followed seemed to dead end in a fog of missing records and redacted documents. Her next step was to visit the National Archives in Washington, D.C. If there was any trace of the event, it would be there. She booked a train ticket for the next morning, her mind racing with possibilities. But as she packed her bag, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The black sedan from the night before had followed her home, and she had seen it parked outside her building several times since. She didn't know who was inside, but she knew they weren't friendly. The train ride was uneventful, but Ellie's nerves were on edge. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone following her. When she arrived in DC, she went straight to the archives. The building was imposing, its marble columns and grand staircase a testament to the weight of history contained within its walls. Ellie spent hours in the reading room, sifting through boxes of declassified documents from the 1980s. She was looking for anything related to quantum physics experiments, government-funded research, or unexplained phenomena. But the more she searched, the more frustrated she became. It was as if the event had never happened. Then, just as she was about to give up, she found something. It was a single sheet of paper, tucked inside a folder labeled Miscellaneous. The document was heavily redacted, with entire paragraphs blacked out, but one line caught her eye: Project Kronos, temporal displacement event. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the proof she needed. But before she could make a copy, a hand reached out and snatched the document from her grasp. Ellie looked up to see a man in a dark suit standing over her. He was tall, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "I'll take that," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Who are you?" Ellie demanded, standing up. "That's public record. You can't just take it. And I'm the only one who can tell you the truth about what happened on October 12, 1987. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "What happened?" Dr. Carter hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. "We were trying to create a device that could manipulate time," she said. "But something went wrong. The experiment created a temporal rift, and for a few seconds, time itself unraveled. When it was over, the world was different. But no one remembered what had happened, except for a few of us. The government erased the event from history, and anyone who knew the truth was silenced." Ellie's mind was reeling. But why? Why would they do that? Dr. Carter's expression darkened. Because the event wasn't an accident. It was a test. And now they're planning to do it again. Before Ellie could respond, a loud bang echoed through the night. Dr. Carter's eyes widened in fear. "They're here," she whispered. "You need to run. Now." Ellie turned to see two men in black suits approaching from the shadows. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Dr. Carter's arm and pulled her into the darkness, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. The hidden network. Ellie and Dr. Carter ran through the darkened streets of Washington, D.C., their footsteps echoing against the pavement. The men in black suits were close behind, their voices barking orders into radios. Ellie's heart pounded as she gripped Dr. Carter's arm, pulling her into an alleyway. They pressed themselves against the cold brick wall, trying to catch their breath. "Who are they?" Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "They're part of the organization," Dr. Carter replied, her eyes darting toward the entrance of the alley. "The ones who erased the event. They've been watching me for years, waiting for me to slip up." Ellie's mind raced. What organization? Who's behind this? Dr. Carter hesitated, then shook her head. "There's no time to explain. If they catch us, we're dead. We need to get to a safe place." Ellie nodded, her journalist instincts kicking in. She pulled out her phone and quickly called a contact she trusted, a former colleague named Marcus who lived in DC. He answered on the second ring. "Ellie? It's late. What's going on?" "Marcus, I need your help. I'm being chased, and I need a place to hide. Can I come to your apartment?" There was a pause on the other end. "Ellie, are you in trouble?" "Yes, please, Marcus. I'll explain when I get there." Another pause. Then, "Okay, come over, but be careful." Ellie hung up and turned to Dr. Carter. "I have a friend nearby. We can hide there." Dr. Carter nodded, and the two women slipped out of the alley, keeping to the shadows as they made their way to Marcus's apartment. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Ellie kept glancing over her shoulder, but the men in black suits were nowhere to be seen. When they reached Marcus's building, Ellie buzzed his apartment, and he let them in without a word. They took the elevator to the 5th floor, where Marcus was waiting in the doorway. He was in his early 30s, with tousled hair and a look of concern on his face. "Ellie, what the hell is going on?" he asked as they stepped inside. "It's a long story," Ellie said, closing the door behind them. "This is Dr. They erased the event to cover their tracks, but they never stopped working on the technology. And now they're ready to try again." Ellie's stomach churned. When are they planning to do it?" "Soon," Dr. Carter said. "I don't know the exact date, but I know they've been preparing for years. They've built a new facility hidden deep underground, and this time they think they can control it." Ellie's mind was spinning. "We have to stop them. But how?" Dr. Carter hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "This contains everything I know about Project Kronos, the original plans, the names of the people involved, and the location of the new facility. But it's encrypted. You'll need someone who can break into it." Ellie took the USB drive, her fingers closing around it tightly. "I know someone who can help." Marcus returned with 3 mugs of coffee, setting them on the table. "Okay, someone needs to tell me what's going on." Ellie took a deep breath and quickly filled Marcus in on everything she had learned. His expression grew more serious with each passing moment. "This is insane," he said when she finished. "If what you're saying is true, this could change everything." "It is true," Dr. Carter said firmly. "And if we don't stop them, the consequences will be catastrophic." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. "Okay, what do you need from me?" Ellie handed him the USB drive. "Can you decrypt this? We need to know what's on it." Marcus nodded. "I'll do my best, but it might take some time." As Marcus set to work on the USB drive, Ellie turned back to Dr. Carter. "You said there were others who knew the truth. Are they still alive?" Dr. Carter's expression darkened. "Most of them are dead. The organization silenced anyone who could expose them. Because I can't stay silent anymore." Dr. Carter. Ellie's hands trembled as she held the laptop, the weight of what they were carrying pressing down on her. When they arrived in Virginia, they took a cab to Ellie's friend's house. Her name was Priya Patel, and she was a former hacker who now worked as a cybersecurity consultant. Priya opened the door, her eyes widening when she saw Ellie's disheveled state. "Ellie, what's going on?" "No time to explain," Ellie said, pushing past her into the house. "We need your help." Priya led them to her home office, where multiple monitors glowed with lines of code. Ellie handed her the laptop. "We need to access these files. They're encrypted, and we don't have much time." Priya didn't ask questions. She plugged the laptop into her system and began typing furiously. Ellie and Dr. Carter watched over her shoulder as the files began to unlock. "This is heavy stuff," Priya muttered as she scanned the documents. "Government secrets, experimental technology. What the hell are you into, Ellie?" "Something bigger than any of us," Ellie replied. "We need to find the location of a facility. It's where they're planning to recreate the event." Priya's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Give me a minute." As Priya worked, Ellie turned to Dr. Carter. Priya provided them with fake IDs and hacked into the facility systems to create a distraction. By nightfall, they were ready. Ellie, Dr. Carter, and Jonah drove to the facility, which was located in a remote area surrounded by dense forest. They parked a mile away and hiked through the woods, staying off the main roads to avoid detection. When they reached the facility, Ellie's heart sank. It was a massive complex, surrounded by high fences and patrolled by armed guards. Security cameras scanned the perimeter, and floodlights illuminated the area. "This is it," Jonah whispered. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back." Ellie nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's go." Using the schematics from the files, they found a service entrance that was less heavily guarded. Jonah disabled the security cameras, and they slipped inside, moving quickly and quietly through the corridors. The facility was a labyrinth of sterile white hallways and locked doors. They followed the schematics to the main lab, where the experiment was set to take place. As they approached, they could hear voices, scientists and technicians preparing for the event. Ellie peeked through a window in the door and saw a massive machine in the center of the room. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. A swirling mass of wires, tubes, and glowing lights. Scientists in lab coats were gathered around it, making final adjustments. "That's it," Dr. Carter whispered. "The temporal displacement device." Ellie's heart raced. "We need to shut it down." Jonah nodded. "On my signal." He kicked open the door and they rushed into the lab. The scientists froze, their eyes wide with shock. Jonah aimed his weapon at them, his voice firm. "Step away from the machine." But before anyone could move, an alarm blared and the doors slammed shut. Ellie spun around to see a group of armed guards entering the room, their weapons trained on her and her companions. "Drop your weapons," one of the guards ordered. Ellie's heart sank. They were too late. The unstoppable event. The lab was a cacophony of chaos. The blaring alarm echoed off the sterile walls, and the armed guards advanced, their weapons trained on Ellie, Dr. Carter, and Jonah. Ellie's mind raced, but there was no escape. The doors were sealed and they were surrounded. "I said, drop your weapons," the lead guard barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Jonah hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun to the ground. Ellie and Dr. Carter raised their hands, their eyes darting around the room for any possible way out. The scientists, who had been frozen in shock, now began to murmur among themselves, their fear palpable. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and a lab coat, stepped forward. His voice was calm but commanding. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" Ellie took a deep breath, her journalist instincts kicking in. "My name is Ellie Grayson. I'm a reporter, and I know what you're planning to do. You can't go through with this experiment. It's too dangerous." The man's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This project is beyond your comprehension." "I know about October 12th, 1987. Ellie shot back. "I know about the temporal rift, the erased event, and the consequences of your actions. You're playing with forces you can't control." The man's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're mistaken. This experiment is under control. We've learned from the past. This time we'll succeed." Dr. Carter stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "You're wrong. The rift you created last time was a fluke. If you try to recreate it, you'll destroy everything. Time isn't something you can manipulate without consequences." The man's face hardened. "Enough. Take them to holding. We'll deal with them after the experiment." The guards moved in, grabbing Ellie, Dr. Carter, and Jonah. Ellie struggled, but it was no use. They were dragged out of the lab and down a series of corridors to a small, windowless room. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving them in darkness. Ellie sank to the floor, her mind racing. "We have to get out of here. We have to stop them." Jonah cursed under his breath. "There's no way out. We're trapped." Dr. Carter sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. "There's still a chance," she said softly. "If we can disrupt the experiment from the inside, we might be able to stop it." Ellie looked at her. "How? We're locked in here." Dr. Carter's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "The facility has a fail-safe system. If the experiment goes wrong, it's designed to shut down automatically. But it has to be triggered manually." Jonah frowned. "And how do we do that from in here?" Dr. Carter reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a remote control of some kind. "I took this from the lab. It's a backup trigger for the failsafe. If we can get it to the main control room, we can shut everything down." Ellie's heart leapt. "But how do we get out of here?" Jonah stood up, his eyes scanning the room. "Leave that to me." He moved to the door and began examining the lock. After a few moments, he pulled a small tool from his belt and started working on it. Ellie watched in awe as he picked the lock with practiced ease. The door clicked open, and they slipped out into the hallway. The facility was eerily quiet, the alarm having been silenced. They moved quickly and quietly, following Dr. Carter's directions to the main control room. Along the way, they avoided guards and security cameras, their hearts pounding with every step. When they reached the control room, they found it empty. The monitors displayed the status of the experiment, which was nearing its final stages. Dr. Carter rushed to the console and began typing furiously. "We don't have much time," she said. "The experiment is about to begin." Ellie watched the monitors, her stomach churning. The machine in the lab was powering up, its lights growing brighter and brighter. The scientists were gathered around it, their faces a mixture of excitement and fear. "Hurry," Ellie urged. Dr. Carter's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm trying, but the system is locked. I need to bypass the security protocols." Jonah stood guard at the door, his weapon at the ready. "We've got company." Ellie turned to see a group of guards approaching down the hallway. Jonah fired a warning shot, and they retreated, but it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. "Got it." The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew thick with energy. Ellie felt a strange sensation, as if the world around her was unraveling. She looked at Dr. Carter and Jonah, their faces filled with fear, and then everything went white. When Ellie opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground in the middle of a forest. The facility was gone, and the sky above her was a deep, unnatural shade of red. She sat up, her head spinning, and looked around. Dr. Carter and Jonah were nearby, both unconscious but alive. Ellie shook them awake, her heart pounding. "Where are we?" Jonah asked, his voice groggy. Dr. Carter looked around, her eyes wide with horror. "We're somewhere else. The experiment worked. The rift opened, and it pulled us through." Ellie's stomach churned. "What does that mean?" Dr. Carter's voice was trembling. "It means the event wasn't stopped. The timeline has been altered, and we're stuck in the middle of it." Ellie looked at the red sky, her mind reeling. The event that had been erased from history had happened again, and this time it couldn't be undone. The world as they knew it was gone.